This is part 1 of the North Central Texas Regional ITS Architecture Update Usage Seminar. This part is titled Using the Architecture. There are 2 other parts to this usage seminar. This part is followed by part 2, Project Consistency with the Architecture, and that is followed by part 3, Architecture Maintenance. The agenda for this part 1 is to define what a regional ITS architecture is, a closer look at the North Central Texas Regional ITS architecture, and describe how stakeholders will use the architecture. The objectives of this part 1 are to define what the architecture is and does for North Central Texas, review the components of the North Central Texas Regional ITS architecture, and to discuss how and when stakeholders will use the architecture in planning, programming, and implementation. A regional ITS architecture provides a structured framework for regional ITS deployment and integration, including the information exchanged among devices. It shows the connection among ITS services across the agencies in the region. It identifies the gaps in the region's systems and services, meaning it identifies services that are not currently provided but are needed. And it assists in the development of cooperative agreements among agencies in order to move forward with ITS projects. This is a picture of a conceptual regional ITS architecture. It shows the centers, the vehicles, the roadway equipment, and other devices that are exchanging information through wireless and wired communications. A regional ITS architecture includes a definition of the region in terms of the services it will be providing through ITS, the geographic scope, and the time frame that it will be performed within. It defines the stakeholders who have ITS devices, participate in ITS projects, or possibly fund ITS projects. It defines the current and future transportation ITS services that will be provided in the region. It explains the information exchanges for the region. In other words, the information that will be traveling from device to device. It provides a definition of the agency roles and responsibilities at a high level. That means what each agency will do in order to achieve the ITS projects. It defines the functions that will be performed by ITS elements in order to achieve the region's ITS needs. It defines the applicable standards that can be used to define information exchanges and create an open and non-proprietary system. It lists the projects that are planned for the region over the next 12 years in terms of near-term, medium-term, and long-term. Near-term being the first 3 years, medium being the 3rd through 7th year, and long-term being the 7th through 12th year. And it describes the needed interagency agreements in order to achieve the projects. Not included in a regional ITS architecture are detailed project designs that include the quantities of devices, the locations those devices will be placed at, the specific communication such as wireless or microwave or fiber optic, the brands or the exact technologies that will be used to achieve the services and functions of the architecture. The architecture is technology neutral and independent. It focuses on the functions and not on the devices by brand or technology that will achieve those functions. And regional ITS architecture also does not include costs. Why does a region develop an ITS architecture? To identify integration opportunities among agencies, to improve information sharing by allowing stakeholders to see what information is available and how they may be able to use it, to efficiently deploy technology by creating open, non-proprietary systems that stakeholders can participate in, and by allowing stakeholders to purchase equipment from multiple vendors that will be interoperable. To plan for future expansion by seeing what additional services can be leveraged and can be built off of existing systems. To assist in estimating and leveraging funding by using ITS resources to estimate costs, and also to understand how funding may qualify under ITS rules. To deploy consistent projects and systems so that they are, as said before, open and non-proprietary and able to share information. And to comply with the federal rule, and that is FTA and FHWA rule requirements that state that ITS projects must be included in an ITS architecture to qualify for federal funding. The North Central Texas ITS architecture covers 16 counties. It has a 12-year planning time frame, near-term, medium-term, and long-term. It includes a wide range of stakeholders and addresses a wide range of ITS services. In North Central Texas, the ITS architecture covers the following service areas: roadway management, parking management, traveler information, transit systems, emergency management, maintenance and construction, and toll collection. These include both existing and planned services. In roadway management, types of services are signal control and coordination, traffic monitoring and surveillance, signal preemption for emergency purposes or for transit vehicles, and connected vehicles, automated vehicle highway systems, and automated vehicles. For parking management, the types of services include facility coordination, fee collection, and parking information. For traveler information, the services include dynamic message signs, a 511 website, other regional transportation information websites, and transit information systems. For transit systems, the services include vehicle tracking using automated vehicle location systems, demand response transit operations, fare management systems for fare collection, and transit signal priority. In emergency management, the services include signal preemption, dynamic routing of emergency vehicles, coordinated response across agencies, incident management, courtesy patrols, and flood monitoring. In maintenance and construction, the services include automated work zones, improved information sharing among agencies about upcoming and planned maintenance and construction projects, maintenance vehicle tracking using automated vehicle location, and flood monitoring. Electronic toll collection includes services for the LBJ Express, for North Tarrant, and for the North Texas Tollway Authority, including fare collection, courtesy patrols, incident management, traveler information, including incident information. The North Central Texas Regional ITS architecture components are stakeholders, inventory, meaning the devices used for ITS, operational concepts, also known as roles and responsibilities, information flows, the information that will flow among the different stakeholders' devices, agreements, communication standards, and future ITS projects. This seminar will now take a walk through the North Central Texas Regional ITS Architecture website to show the different elements and how they may be found in that website. Electronic toll collection includes the LBJ Express, the North Tarrant Express, and the North Texas Tollway Authority. It includes the in-vehicle equipment, the toll facilities, and any databases and management required for toll management. The components of the North Central Texas Regional ITS architecture are the stakeholders, the ITS inventory, the ITS services, the operational concept or stakeholder roles and responsibilities, the information flows, the agreements required for projects, ITS standards, and a list of the ITS projects. ITS stakeholders in the North Central Texas region include freeway management stakeholders such as TxDOT, arterial roadway management such as the major cities and many of the local agencies, maintenance and construction operations for both freeway and arterial, transit providers, including both large providers such as DART and Fort Worth, as well as smaller local providers providing demand response and fixed route service, emergency service providers such as fire, police, ambulance, paramedics, planning organizations who aid in the development of ITS projects and transportation plans, the federal government who provides oversight and funding and support for projects, and others who participate in the planning, design, and implementation of ITS. This is a diagram of the physical subsystems that are included within the North Central Texas Regional ITS architecture. Each ITS inventory element falls into one of these subsystems. For example, traffic management centers would include any location within a city or within TxDOT or any other agency that is viewing and managing traffic. On the roadway, that includes devices such as signals, dynamic message signs, or surveillance cameras, or traffic detectors. For the vehicle, that includes transponders in vehicles, vehicle radios, any sort of automated vehicle control system, anything that might communicate with the roadway or with centers. And for travelers, it includes personal devices such as computers or telephones, smartphones, or any sort of personal digital assistant. It may also include kiosks. ITS services are defined by 97 service packages in the National ITS architecture. Not all 97 service packages are used in the North Central Texas region. The ITS services define functional bundles or functional services that can be provided by ITS. The example here is of traffic monitoring or traffic surveillance. And so this system has roadway devices such as cameras or detectors and a traffic management center, and the roadway sends images and traffic data to the traffic management center. The traffic management center sends information back to control those devices or to request specific information from them. That is just one example of the 97 service packages that are available in the National ITS architecture. Operational concepts are the roles and responsibilities of the stakeholders. They describe how the region stakeholders will use, operate, and maintain ITS, and they can be formalized in interagency agreements so that all participants in a project agree on what their roles and responsibilities are. For example, in this case, a traffic management center that is connected to a traffic detector and traffic cameras, that management center and its staff has the responsibility to maintain equipment, monitor traffic conditions, share camera images, and collect and analyze traffic data. Functional requirements are similar to the operational concept except they describe what the devices and systems will do, not what the people will do in interacting with them. Functional requirements define what is expected as a function from each piece of ITS equipment. They are generally used as shall statements. The center shall monitor the locations of all transit vehicles within its network. The center shall determine adherence of transit vehicles to their assigned schedule. These are examples of a transit tracking service. These can also be used in the procurement of ITS by including them or expanding on them in procurement documents by stating that the system must do these functions. They may also be used as a starting point to define more detailed functional requirements. ITS information flows are the flows that are defined between ITS elements. It defines not only the information to be exchanged, but the direction of that information flow. In this slide is a diagram of a complex information flow diagram for an individual project. Each line represents a flow, both in the near term and in the medium term, among several ITS elements in the North Central Texas region. There will be more information about information flows later in this seminar and in part 2. Agreements describe the agreements that may be needed between agencies for planning, programming, and implementation of ITS. Typical agreement types include handshake agreements, which are usually used for projects that happen within a single agency and where a formal agreement is not needed. It can also cover very early planning stages when you are still exploring what a project will do and have not settled on agreeing to perform any operation. Memorandums of understanding also occur during the planning stage in general and define an agreement among the partners in that project on what they expect the project to do and what they expect their role and responsibility will be. Operating agreements are the types of agreements for defining operations of an ITS project. It defines who will do which role and what is expected of each in detail, as well as what information will be exchanged and what benefits there will be to each partner. Funding agreements define the funding scheme for a project, who will pay for what portion, how it will be funded not only in capital but also in operations and maintenance. An additional type of agreement is often a master agreement that already exists between agencies. Some ITS projects may fall within an existing master agreement between two agencies. ITS standards are defined by 7 nonprofit entities that have been hired by the HWA to define standards for ITS information exchange. They are open, non-proprietary data exchange protocols and formats that should be used for information flows. The value of the standards is that by adhering to them in your projects, you make your systems available and interoperable with future and existing systems that have also adhered to those standards. When a vendor adheres to the ITS standards, you may hire or contract with other vendors to build other pieces of a system, and the pieces should be able to interoperate. ITS projects are those projects that either are fully ITS or have ITS elements to them, as defined in the architecture. The architecture defines them at a high level. It does not define specific details. It just gives sufficient information for initial project definitions. ITS projects in the architecture do not represent commitments to funding. They do not represent commitments to implementation by any of the stakeholders. In addition, an ITS project in the architecture may actually be deployed in several stages in the real world. One project as defined in the architecture may actually require 3 separate projects and 3 separate funding rounds. It may also be that 2 projects in the ITS architecture can be deployed in one project as defined in a program or implementation. ITS projects, as defined in the architecture, are high-level descriptions that describe a project-level architecture. In other words, it describes the project in architecture terms such as functions, information flows, standards, required agreements. It is not the same as a project design and does not include elements such as quantities, types of devices, communication protocol. They do, however, provide sufficient information for initial project definitions that can be used for further design. ITS projects, when identified in the architecture, are not commitments that the project is programmed or will be implemented. It does not mean that funding has been made available for the project. It means that there is a possibility or a plan that that project may happen in the area, and the area wants to be prepared for it. A project as defined in the architecture may represent several smaller projects as defined later in the design phase. One project may require several funding rounds or several separate procurement processes in order to achieve all of its functionality. Similarly, a project in the architecture may be deployed, or two projects may be deployed in a single funding or a single design. It just depends on what functions are going to be included in the project design. This is an example of the North Central Texas Regional ITS architecture. The areas that you can link to are shown on the left-hand side of the screen. The scope describes the architecture, its time frame, geographic scope, and service scope. The stakeholders describes each stakeholder participating in the architecture. It includes all stakeholders and groups, which are groupings of stakeholders that are functionally similar and can be shown in the architecture through groups. By clicking on any one stakeholder, you can identify which groups it participates in and what inventory it is associated with. The inventory button describes every ITS element in the region that has been identified, both existing and planned. Under the inventory button, they are in alphabetical order with descriptions of each element. Under the entity button, they are grouped by their entity type: RK data management, emergency management, emergency vehicle, and so on. By stakeholder, you can view any city's ITS elements. By clicking on an element, you can view a description of the element, the stakeholder, its functionality, who it interfaces to, what other devices it interfaces to, and a context diagram that shows how it interfaces to those other devices. The Services button describes all the ITS services as defined by the National ITS architecture that are existing and planned in the region. By clicking on any ITS service, you get a description of that service and the elements in the region that are or will be participating in that service. Again, clicking on any of these provides you a description of that inventory element, including a context diagram. Operational concepts are broken down by service area and describe the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders in each area. For freeway management, the architecture website describes the roles and responsibilities of all stakeholders who are participating in freeway management, including the traveling public. And it describes at a high level what their roles and responsibilities are to achieve the objectives of the ITS architecture. Requirements describe the functions of the systems Each functional requirement is a shall statement. By clicking on them, you can see what agencies participate and what functional requirements the systems will perform. The Interfaces button shows how each element is connected to other elements. Again, by clicking on these inventory element items, you can see how they are connected to other systems. It shows which direction information flows and what types of information flow. Standards lists the National ITS Architecture standards that are applicable to the North Central Texas Regional ITS Architecture. These standards are developed by FHWA-approved standards developing organizations. The list is organized by the standard developing organization and by the title of the standard. By clicking on these, you can get a more detailed definition of each of these standards and determine whether it is applicable to your project. The agreements describes all the types of agreements that are relevant to the North Central Texas Regional ITS Architecture by project. For example, for arterial road weather improvements, there is a memorandum of understanding that will be required, as well as an operating agreement. By clicking on that link, you may get a description of the operating agreement that will be required and which stakeholders will participate in that operating agreement. The Projects button provides a list of all of the projects planned in the region. By clicking on a project, you get a description of the project at a high level, its status, the stakeholders participating in that project, the inventory that will participate in that project, the services that will be provided by the project, and all of the interfaces, meaning the information exchanges that may be developed during that project. The North Central Texas Regional ITS Architecture may be used by stakeholders in the planning, programming, and implementation of ITS projects. During the planning process, the architecture may be used for long-range planning, and it is encouraged to be integrated with the long-range planning process. It may also be used in transportation improvement programs and project development. The North Central Texas Regional ITS Architecture can be used as the basis for operational strategies and high-level project descriptions. The architecture can be used to help evaluate and prioritize transportation strategies by viewing ITS projects and understanding their dependence and relationship on other ITS, and to evaluate the priority of the services that each provides. It can be used to integrate the ITS architecture and its projects into long-range planning by incorporating the ITS project sequencing into the long-range plan, both through ITS projects and through projects with ITS elements, and to ensure that the long-range plans are correctly represented in the architecture. Often, agencies coordinate the two and update them at the same time in order to ensure that the long-range plan and the ITS architecture both represent ITS consistently. The planning organization should view ITS projects and projects that include some ITS elements alongside other transportation projects in the planning organization and in prioritizing a list of projects for funding and for implementation. In programming, the North Central Texas Regional ITS Architecture can be used to prove that projects are qualified for federal funding. It can be used to identify and define projects because each ITS project has a high-level description that can be the starting point for a project design. The architecture should be used to identify and verify the services and information exchanges of a project and to verify that the receiving elements or the sending elements exist and are represented. And the architecture should be used to verify consistency with regional ITS plans. Part 2 of this seminar covers how to ensure consistency with the architecture. In implementation, the North Central Texas Regional ITS architecture can be used in the systems engineering process during project initiation, preliminary engineering, and plans, specifications, and estimates. During project initiation, the architecture provides a high-level scope and description. It names the participating stakeholders, the agreements that are needed, and the roles and responsibilities of those stakeholders. During preliminary engineering, the architecture provides high-level functional requirements and interface definitions. During plan specifications and estimates, the architecture provides applicable ITS standards that should be included in the development of the project. These are links to websites that are relevant to the North Central Texas Regional ITS architecture. The first is the North Central Texas Regional ITS website on the COGS website. The second is the National ITS Architecture website. The third is also on the National ITS Architecture website, and it is a page linking to free online training courses and other on-site training opportunities for ITS architecture. The last is the Federal Highway Administration's Regional Architecture Guidance, describing how to develop, use, and maintain a regional ITS architecture. For more questions or comments about the North Central Texas Regional ITS architecture, please contact Marion Thompson or Eric Quintana at the North Central Texas Council of Governments. This concludes Part 1 of the North Central Texas Regional ITS Architecture Update Usage Seminar.